People love round numbers because round numbers let them dream without doing arithmetic. $1 million sounds rich, 6 figures sounds respectable. A 7-figure net worth sounds like a finish line. People say those numbers with the same tone they use when they talk about distant cities. They have never visited, they treat wealth like a skyline, they look at it from far away and assume the only thing that matters is how tall the buildings are. I have never thought about money that way. The most important money in a person's life is usually not the money that makes him look rich. It is the money that changes the way he thinks. It is the money that takes him out of fear. It is the money that gives him a little distance between himself and the next bad surprise. It is the money that keeps him from making weak decisions, because the clock is ticking, and the landlord wants his rent, and the car needs repairs, and the paycheck has already been spent in his imagination before it even arrives. That is why I think the first truly life-changing pile of money is often much smaller than people imagine. For a great many ordinary people, the number is $20,000. I know that sounds almost comically small in a culture that worships giant incomes, giant houses, giant portfolios, giant headlines, and giant egos. But the market does not care about your ego, and life does not care about the story you tell your friends. Life cares about whether you have a margin of safety. Life cares about whether one unpleasant surprise can knock you flat. Life cares about whether you can afford to say no. Most people spend years thinking the big prize is feeling rich. They miss the far more important step, which is no longer feeling hunted. When a person has nothing set aside, every financial decision is secretly made under threat. He may not describe it that way. He may call it practicality, he may call it adulthood. He may say he is just doing what he has to do. But the truth is simpler. He is negotiating with his entire life from a weak position. He takes the first job he can get because he cannot let a pay cycle pass without income. He keeps a bad boss longer than he should because anger is cheaper than unemployment until the bills arrive. He accepts unreasonable demands because he needs the next deposit more than he needs his own dignity. He cannot think about opportunity because his mind is busy guarding the door against disaster. A brain under scarcity is not lazy. It is occupied. That is the mistake many intelligent people make when they judge those who cannot get ahead. They see only the math. They do not see the compression. They do not see what happens when a human being is forced to use all his mental bandwidth on near-term survival. It is difficult to think intelligently about growth when your internal alarm system is going off every day. It is hard to plan for compounding when your house feels one emergency away from smoke. That is why the first threshold matters so much. Crossing $20,000 does not make you rich overnight. It does something more valuable than that. It changes the quality of your decisions. I have spent my life studying compounding, but compounding is not only a mathematical event. It is a behavioral event. It begins before the spreadsheet notices it. It begins when a person stops making frightened choices. The money in the account matters, but the real shift happens in the mind holding the account. There is research from Vanguard that makes this point in a way people can measure. They found that having just $2,000 in emergency savings can increase financial well-being by 21%. That is a striking result because $2,000 is not a fortune. It is less than many people spend on a vacation, a few months of careless delivery orders, or a machine they convinced themselves they needed and barely use. Yet that small reserve changes how a person feels because it creates the first thin layer of protection between himself and chaos. Push that buffer to 3 to 6 months of living expenses, which for many people lands around $20,000, and the improvement in financial well-being gets another 13% boost. I do not mention those numbers because I worship surveys. I mention them because they line up with something investors learn the hard way. Once fear eases, judgment improves. Once judgment improves, outcomes begin to change. It is not magic, it is cause and effect. Before a person reaches that first serious reserve, every setback feels like an attack. The car breaks down and it is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis, the laptop dies, and it is not an annoying bill. It is a direct threat to work, income, and dignity. Rent rises and it is not a budgeting problem. It is a countdown. After a person reaches a real buffer, those same events do not become pleasant, but they become manageable. That difference is enormous. Manageable problems do not hijack the nervous system. Manageable problems leave room for thought. Manageable problems allow a human being to remain strategic. That is the first reason $20,000 matters. It buys breathing room. The second reason is that it changes what a person sees. When people are broke, they think the world is full of threats, because for them, it is every invitation can become a hidden expense. Every chance to learn can require money they do not have. Every career move can carry timing risk they cannot absorb. Every opportunity is filtered through the same miserable question: can I survive the downside? That question strangles action. A conference that could lead to a better job is no longer a possible investment in yourself. It becomes airfare, hotel, food, and a missed shift. A small business opportunity is no longer a possible source of upside. It becomes money you cannot afford to lose. A market correction is no longer a sale. It is a frightening spectacle you watch from the outside, because you are trying to protect what little cash you have. That is what people really mean when they say money goes to money. They often say it with bitterness, as if the universe is running a private club. The more useful way to say it is that money gives you options, and options increase the number of situations in which intelligence can actually operate. Without options, your judgment may be fine, but your hands are tied. With options, the same judgment can finally matter. $20,000 is often the first amount that gives an ordinary person genuine optionality. Optionality is one of the most underappreciated ideas in personal finance. People like visible symbols, houses, watches, salaries, titles. Optionality does not photograph well. Yet optionality is what changes lives: the ability to wait, the ability to refuse, the ability to move, the ability to invest, the ability to repair, the ability to absorb a bad quarter without destroying the next 10 years. Those are wealth behaviors long before they are wealth aesthetics. If you save $1,000 per month and earn an 8% return, the first $20,000 takes about 19 months. That stretch feels long because, in the beginning, almost all the lifting comes from you. Discipline is carrying the full load. You are pushing uphill. You are changing habits, tracking spending, saying no, watching friends spend freely, and wondering whether the whole exercise is too small to matter. That stage is emotionally expensive. People imagine the difficulty of saving is mostly about arithmetic. It is not. The first $20,000 is hard because it asks you to behave like a different person before you receive any of the emotional rewards of being that person. It asks you to be patient while progress looks slow. It asks you to trust a process that has not yet started flattering you. That is why many people quit somewhere along the way. They do not fail because the strategy is unsound. They fail because the psychological return arrives later than the effort. But once that first threshold is crossed, the machine begins to act differently. The second $20,000 does not take another 19 months. At the same savings rate and return, it takes about 17 months. You did not suddenly become a genius. You did not gain access to a secret hedge fund. The same index funds are available to someone with $1,000 and someone with $20,000. The difference is scale. The money is finally helping. That is the beginning of compounding becoming visible. By the time you are, more of the work is being done by capital and less by pure sacrifice. When the portfolio grows large enough, the acceleration becomes almost absurd. At around $400,000, the next $20,000 can arrive in about 5 months. The same milestone that once took nearly 2 years begins to show up almost on its own. That is what people misunderstand about wealth. They think the rich have discovered a separate universe. Sometimes, at the far extremes, they do have access to different deals. But for most people, the dramatic change comes from basic arithmetic applied to enough capital for long enough. 10% on $9,000 is $100. 10% on $10,000 is $1,000. 10% on $20,000 is $2,000. The investment is not more sophisticated. The percentage is not more magical. The amount is simply large enough that the result begins to matter in daily life. When your capital base is tiny, your returns feel decorative. When your capital base reaches $20,000, your returns begin to feel consequential. That feeling matters because it changes motivation. Human beings endure sacrifice more willingly when the sacrifice starts to generate evidence. Before the first threshold, progress often feels abstract. After the threshold, progress starts to talk back. There is another layer to this that matters even more than the arithmetic. When a person reaches $20,000 from zero, he has done something far more significant than stacking money. He has built proof of character. I do not say that in a sentimental way. I say it as a practical observation. If you begin with nothing and arrive at $20,000, honestly, you have almost certainly trained several muscles that will matter for the rest of your financial life. You have learned how to notice where money leaks. You have learned how to distinguish desire from impulse. You have learned that tiny repeated decisions can overpower occasional good intentions. You have learned how to delay gratification. You have learned how to continue saving after the first enthusiasm wears off. You have learned how to act in accordance with a long-term objective while surrounded by short-term temptations. Those are not trivial skills. Those are the roots of every serious fortune. A person who has proved to himself that he can accumulate $20,000 has also proved that he can direct his own behavior over a sustained period. That is a bigger achievement than most people recognize. Identity changes before balance sheets do. At first, a person says he is trying to save money. Then he says he is becoming more responsible. Then, if he stays with it long enough, something more durable happens. He begins to see himself as the kind of person who does not need to spend every dollar he touches. He begins to understand that money is not just for consumption. It is also for defense, leverage, and freedom. That identity shift is where the future starts to separate. Before that shift, a $4 coffee can trigger guilt because everything feels fragile. After that shift, the coffee matters less. Not because discipline disappeared, but because priorities have been established. You no longer need to perform frantic mental gymnastics over every tiny purchase. You know where the real decisions live. That leads to one of the most liberating changes that occurs when a person reaches a genuine financial base. He starts to care less about microspending and more about major decisions. The broke mind obsesses over small things because small things are visible and immediate. Should I buy the generic cereal or the name brand? Should I make coffee at home or buy one on the way? Should I spend a little more for this or a little less for that? Those choices are not meaningless, but they are not the center of the problem. The big levers are elsewhere. Where you live, what you drive, how much of your income you keep, whether you keep increasing your fixed costs as soon as your salary rises, whether you invest consistently, whether you mistake lifestyle inflation for success. A person can win 100 tiny grocery debates and still ruin himself with one oversized housing payment, one vain card decision, or one permanent expansion of monthly obligations. That is why $20,000 is such a useful teacher. It pushes your mind toward strategy. It teaches you to stop wasting intelligence on pennies while ignoring the decisions that can swing your net worth by tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. People who have never had a reserve often think financial peace comes from earning more. Earning more helps, but it does not solve the deeper issue by itself. If your habits remain undisciplined, more income often just funds more complexity. You move to a larger place, you buy the more impressive car, you accept higher recurring costs, you create a life that looks upgraded from the outside and feels more fragile on the inside. The person with no buffer is often trapped by obvious hardship. The person with a rising income and no discipline is trapped by hidden commitments. That is a more elegant prison, but it is still a prison. $20,000, handled correctly, gives you a first taste of another model. Instead of asking whether you can afford the monthly payment, you begin asking what a decision costs in opportunity. That question is one of the most powerful questions in finance. A $30,000 car is never just a $30,000 car. It is $30,000 plus insurance, maintenance, fuel, registration, and depreciation. It is also the future value of the capital you are surrendering. In the source material, the comparison is plain. That same $30,000 could become more than $200,000 over 20 years if it compounds instead of evaporating in a driveway. That is not an argument that everyone should drive a miserable car and deny himself every pleasure. It is an argument that every major purchase should be judged against freedom, not theater. A flashy purchase often rents you a feeling and sells away your options. A careful purchase often looks modest and quietly funds your future autonomy. The average person can spend $600 to $800 per month on transportation once car payments, insurance, maintenance, and gas are counted. Over 40 years, that can add up to $400,000 or more. Think about the brutality of that. A person complains he cannot save enough to retire, while an enormous stream of capital is leaving his life every month to support an object that starts losing value the moment he drives it home. A new car can drop about 20% in value as soon as it leaves the lot. He is not merely spending. He is funding depreciation and calling it success. This is why I have always liked simple economic truths that feel almost impolite in their directness. Wealth is not primarily built by looking wealthy. It is built by owning productive assets and by refusing to make large, foolish commitments just because the culture applauds them. There is a beautiful irony in personal finance. The person driving the most impressive car is often under the most pressure. The person in the older, reliable vehicle may be building equity, buying time, and sleeping better at night. That irony becomes easier to appreciate after $20,000. Because you are no longer evaluating every purchase as a statement about your status. You are evaluating it as a claim on your future. Once a person starts thinking that way, he notices something almost embarrassing. A surprising amount of what he thought he wanted was simply borrowed desire. He did not truly want the bigger apartment as much as he wanted the emotional identity he associated with it. He did not truly want the expensive toy as much as he wanted relief, validation, or proof that sacrifice had not been for nothing. The market is full of businesses designed to monetize that confusion. They sell the sensation of advancement while quietly consuming the capital required for real advancement. That is why the first serious reserve is so powerful. It slows you down. It gives you enough distance to examine your own desires before paying for them. There is another area where $20,000 changes the game dramatically, and that is work. A person living paycheck to paycheck is rarely negotiating at work. He is complying. He may tell himself he is being professional. Sometimes he truly is. But underneath the surface, the economics are obvious. If missing one paycheck creates panic, then the employer holds a large invisible weapon. The employee may dislike the boss, the environment, the demands, or the direction of the company, but he still has to nod because the immediate need for cash overwhelms every other consideration. That condition distorts behavior. You are less likely to ask for the raise you deserve. You are less likely to push back against unreasonable requests. You are less likely to take time for interviews. You are less likely to leave a toxic environment. You are less likely to take a chance on a more promising path. You are, in every practical sense, stuck. $20,000 begins to weaken that trap. It becomes what I would call walking away money, not reckless money, not arrogant money, not money that entitles you to foolishness. Walking away money, the money that lets you survive long enough to preserve your judgment. That alone can alter an entire career. When a person knows he can survive for months if he needs to, his posture changes even if he never quits. He speaks differently. He evaluates requests differently. He becomes more willing to say no to nonsense and yes to meaningful growth. He may ask for the raise. He may negotiate more firmly. He may be more open to relocation, skill building, or role changes. He may volunteer for harder work because he is no longer panicking about every misstep. Confidence, when supported by a margin of safety, has economic value. The remarkable thing is that many people do not have to spend their walking away money for it to transform their lives. Merely having it changes their demeanor. And that changed demeanor can improve the very circumstances that once kept them trapped. Better assignments, better negotiating leverage, better opportunities, better pay. All because the relationship between fear and behavior changed. This is how positive loops begin. You save enough to reduce fear. Reduced fear improves judgment. Better judgment improves action. Better action improves improved income, and investment behavior increase savings. And then the cycle reinforces itself. The reverse is also true. Scarcity causes fear. Fear damages judgment. Damaged judgment produces weak decisions. Weak decisions preserve scarcity. That loop can continue for decades if nothing interrupts it. $20,000 often functions as the first interruption. But this is where people commit one of the dumbest mistakes in personal finance. They finally reach a meaningful reserve, feel relief for the first time in years, and then treat that reserve as a reward pool. They buy the car they have been fantasizing about. They take the expensive trip because they feel they deserve it. They make a down payment on a house whose monthly cost will put them back into strain. They celebrate the foundation by removing it. That is backward. The first $20,000 is not a prize for good behavior. It is the base from which an entire financial life can be built. It is the seed. Seeds are not supposed to look glamorous. They are supposed to be protected long enough to grow. A great many families spend their whole lives destroying seeds and wondering why they never harvest much. If I had to summarize the practical meaning of $20,000 in one sentence, I would say this: it is the amount at which money begins to stop being only a consumable and starts becoming a partner. Before that point, almost every dollar that enters your life already has a destination in the world of spending. After that point, some dollars are allowed to stay on your side. That changes the relationship. A person who has never had capital working for him can easily underestimate the emotional impact of even modest returns. 8% on a small balance feels tiny. 8% on a meaningful reserve feels like proof. For the first time, can assist instead of merely extracting that sensation matters. It turns saving from a grim act of subtraction into an act of construction. The deeper lesson is not that 20,000 is magical in every circumstance. The exact number can vary with lifestyle, obligations, and geography. The deeper lesson is that there is a first threshold at which fear begins to recede, optionality begins to appear, compounding begins to be felt, and identity begins to harden around discipline instead of impulse. For many people, that threshold is around $20,000. And once they reach it, they discover something that sounds simple but can alter the rest of their lives. They discover that the point of money is not just to buy things. The point of money is to buy better decisions. That thought can rearrange an entire life if a person takes it seriously enough. It can change how he saves. It can change how he spends. It can change how he works. It can change how he invests. It can change how he defines success. The culture constantly invites people to mistake visible consumption for progress. It tells them that if the payment fits, the purchase is justified. It tells them that convenience deserves a premium, that identity deserves a premium, that speed deserves a premium, that emotions deserve financing. Most people obey these messages so consistently that they never notice what has happened. Their incomes rise, yet their breathing room does not. Their possessions improve, yet their leverage over life does not. They look more prosperous and remain deeply exposed. The first serious reserve breaks that spell. Once you have real cash set aside, you start seeing trade-offs with painful clarity. That nicer apartment is not just nicer. It is years of future flexibility exchanged for square footage. That expensive hobby is not just fun. It is a recurring claim on the capital that could have been growing quietly in your corner. That impulse purchase is not merely a momentary indulgence. It is a vote for short-term sensation over long-term independence. People hear words like sacrifice and immediately imagine joyless living. I have never believed the goal of financial life is misery in service of a later spreadsheet. The goal is intentionality. The point is not to squeeze every penny until life becomes mechanical. The point is to stop being unconscious. The point is to direct money toward what truly matters and away from what merely flashes. $20,000 helps because it gives you enough strength to become intentional without feeling constantly endangered. That is a different way to live. When a person has no reserve, he tends to ask whether he can survive the month. When he has a reserve, he can start asking what kind of future he is purchasing with his present habits. That question is the beginning of wisdom. If the answer is that your habits are buying dependence, then something must change. If the answer is that your habits are buying freedom, then keep going. This is why I do not laugh at small beginnings. Small beginnings are how every large compounding machine starts. People love to admire giant fortunes while sneering at the humble acts that create them. They want the oak tree with no patience for the acorn. They want the return without the retained earnings. They want the confidence without the reserve. They want the freedom without the years of saying no. Life does not work that way. The first threshold asks for a different kind of courage than people usually celebrate. It asks for repetitive courage, quiet courage, unseen courage, the courage to be misunderstood for a while, the courage to drive something plain, live somewhere smaller, skip the symbolic upgrade, and build a stake in your own future. Instead, the reward for that courage is not applause. The reward is leverage. Leverage over your own schedule, leverage over bad luck, leverage over employers, leverage over panic, leverage over the lies you tell yourself when you are scared, leverage over the temptation to trade your future for present relief. That kind of leverage compounds in ways that are hard to see from the outside and impossible to overstate from the inside. Once you understand that, $20,000 stops looking small. It starts looking foundational. It is the first amount that can hold up a life while you make better choices. It is the first amount that can give compounding enough material to become visible. It is the first amount that can convert saving from deprivation into momentum. It is the first amount that can teach you that wealth is not mainly about comfort. It is about control over time, control over choices, control over reactions, control over whether one setback gets to dictate the next decade. That is a profound change, and it is why the person who reaches that threshold should not become careless just because he finally feels relief. Relief is the beginning, not the end. Once the reserve exists, the mission changes from simple accumulation to intelligent preservation and patient expansion. The money must stay intact. It must remain available for defense where appropriate and productive for growth where possible. It must not be treated like an emotional refund for past discipline. It must be respected for what it really is, which is the earliest form of self-ownership. I have often found that the most dangerous financial moments are not the obvious disasters. They are the moments when a person starts to feel a little stronger and mistakes that strength for invincibility. A few good months, a promotion, a growing account, a little confidence, and suddenly the old appetite for display comes back disguised as self-care or as a reward for effort. That is when many people hand back the advantage they worked so hard to create. Do not do that. Guard the first threshold. Honor it, add to it. Let it teach you how different life feels when your next decision is not made with your back against the wall. If you keep going after that, the benefits begin to stack. More capital means more compounding. More compounding means less dependence on each paycheck. Less dependence means better judgment. Better judgment means fewer expensive mistakes. Fewer expensive mistakes mean more retained capital. More retained capital means even more options. At some point, the system begins to feel less like a fight for oxygen and more like a structure you are deliberately building brick by brick. That is when the emotional weather changes. You do not panic every time an expense appears. You do not resent every bill as if life is personally attacking you. You do not look at someone else's apparent success and feel only envy. You become calmer because your money is finally giving you time instead of stealing it. And time is an extraordinary asset. Time to think, time to choose, time to recover, time to wait for a better opportunity, time to let investments work, time to avoid selling under pressure, time to live without pretending that every external symbol matters. There are many kinds of wealth in this world, but one of the most practical forms is simply the ability to avoid rushed decisions. $20,000, for many people, is the first amount that buys that ability. That is why I would tell any young person, any family starting over, any worker tired of feeling cornered, and any saver who thinks his slow progress is meaningless, to respect the first threshold. It is not glamorous, but glamour has ruined many balance sheets. It is not impressive at parties, but parties do not determine your freedom. It is not enough to retire on, but it may be the amount that finally allows you to begin behaving like someone who will one day be able to retire on his own terms. Every large fortune is built on earlier moments when someone decided not to consume what could be compounded. Every resilient life is built on earlier moments when someone decided not to weaken his future just to decorate his present. The first $20,000 is often the first visible proof that you have begun making those decisions. Once you have that proof, do not underestimate what it means. You are no longer merely hoping things will improve. You are building a position from which improvement becomes more likely. You are no longer only reacting to life. You are beginning to design it. And that, in my experience, is where real wealth starts.